Did Albert Einstein accidentally discover Bitcoin, or have I gone completely crazy? Well, it's your job to answer that question once I get to the end of the video. So buckle in because I'm about to take you for a ride like one I don't think you've ever been on before. Obviously, I know the premise sounds ridiculous. Einstein died over 50 years before Bitcoin was officially invented by Satoshi Nakamoto. But if you just give me a chance, I think by the end of this video, I will have you convinced that Einstein at least contributed substantially to the discovery or invention of Bitcoin, and that Satoshi Nakamoto could not have done it without him. Or at the very least, that if Einstein was an economist and not a physicist, and alive a few decades later, he himself would have invented Bitcoin. For starters, we know that Bitcoin was built on decades of breakthroughs that came before it, everything from TCP/IP to elliptic curve cryptography to proof of work, etc. But before all that came an idea from Einstein that quite literally changed everything. And it was this: you can't measure reality properly unless you have a constant. And anyone watching this channel who has any interest in Bitcoin probably noticed that money today has the same problem that physics had before Einstein came along. We think we know what things are worth, but we're wrong because we don't have a constant. We don't have a fixed denominator. We're measuring value using a ruler that changes length, which means the lens through which we view the entire world is fundamentally broken. So in this video, I'm going to show you what Einstein proved about measurement and how that discovery leads to Bitcoin being the first ever monetary constant. Real quick, before we go down that rabbit hole, you're watching the Sat Stacker Show, a Bitcoin show for people who think deeper about money. I'm your host. My name is John, aka the Sat Stacker. If you want to learn to better understand and grow your conviction in Bitcoin, you hit the subscribe button and you can zap me sats via the QR code on the screen using your Lightning wallet. And now let me explain how Einstein accidentally invented Bitcoin. Don't forget to leave a comment on whether I successfully land the plane or whether I've completely lost my marbles, whether I'm 2 pizzas short of a full Laszlo. Also comment if you get that joke. So before Einstein, basically everyone, including all the very smart scientists, believed the universe had a kind of fixed stage. Essentially, space is a grid, time is a universal clock, and motion is something you do inside that grid. So if I'm moving and you're standing still, we assume there's some absolute answer to the question, which one of us is actually moving? It feels true, it's intuitive, it makes sense. Obviously, when you're walking, you feel like you're moving and everything else is standing still. So your intuition says motion must be absolute. But spoiler alert, you probably know by now that that's not actually how it works. That entire understanding completely changed when Einstein showed up and proved that motion is relative. If you're on a train and you toss a ball straight up in the air, it comes down in your hand. But to someone watching from outside the train, that ball moved forward while it went up and down. So you have 2 observers and 2 measurements, but both are correct. And it gets even crazier from there. Einstein also said time is relative, length is relative, even the order of events can get weird depending on your frame of reference. So we get it. Everything in the universe is relative. But doesn't that make measuring anything impossible? It'd be sort of like a barter economy where every good is priced relative to every other good. And at some point, it becomes completely impossible to remember or even figure out the ratio of apples to blankets to Shroot Bucks to Stanley Nickels.
10,000 of your dollars is worth one real dollar?
But Einstein didn't just leave us in total chaos. He threw us a lifeline. It's called a constant. In the world of physics, according to Einstein, lots of things depend on your perspective, but one thing does not. And that's the speed of light. C, you remember that from high school? No matter how fast you move, no matter which direction you go, the speed of light stays the same. And that constant is what makes measurement itself even possible. It's the anchor. Without it, nothing stays grounded. If everything is relative and nothing is constant, you can't make sense of anything. Physics would probably not even exist without it. Kind of like how the barter economy could never scale without the introduction of money. But today, money has a relativity problem. And I would argue, outside of Bitcoin, almost nobody realizes it, or more accurately, acknowledges it. When people say, wow, housing got really expensive, they mean a house costs more dollars than it used to. But that's not strictly a value statement. That's a ratio statement. A price is just a relationship, house expressed in terms of dollars. But it's not telling you what the house is worth in some absolute sense. It's telling you what the house is worth relative to the unit you're measuring it against, in this case, dollars. And here's where the whole thing breaks down. Just like primitive physicists before Einstein, we are the unevolved apes who treat the dollar like it's a fixed stage, like it's the grid, the stable measuring stick, as if the dollar is the thing that stays still while everything else moves around it. But the dollar doesn't stay still at all. It's not a constant. In fact, the only thing constant about it is how it changes constantly. In practical terms, what I mean is that the total number of dollars literally changes, and not by a little. It changes by a lot. I've done videos on this before. I'll link one right here. But suffice it to say, for example, the M2 money supply in the United States has gone up approximately 35 times since 1971. I use 1971 because that's when we went off the gold standard, and we'll get to gold a little bit later. So we've built a measurement system where the measuring stick itself is moving, and we just pretend that it's not. Imagine trying to measure anything where the denominator of your measuring stick changes by, about 7% a year. Is the distance from LA to New York getting shorter, or are miles getting longer? Am I getting fatter, or are pounds getting lighter? Do you see the problem here? It literally does not work. Money is supposed to be a unit of account. Prices are supposed to be the signal that tells us how the value of goods and services are changing. Maybe once upon a time, you, like me, took Econ 101 and you saw this price-demand equation, a very sophisticated model that reveals the equilibrium price for a given product, the point where consumer demand for a good meets the price suppliers are willing to accept to produce the desired quantity of said good. But if you look at it closely, you might notice that this equation conveniently leaves out a very important variable. Price, of course, can only do its job if the thing you use to measure prices is constant. But it's not. The value of the money itself is not constant. Actually, I'm wondering if value is even the right word to use there in that sentence, because the key is that the denominator is not constant, which is why prices are no longer an accurate signal anymore. That price equilibrium chart needs a whole nother variable. It's basically vector calculus now. Do you see what I mean? To find an accurate equilibrium price, it's not just has the supply or demand for this good changed, it's also has the supply of dollars changed. Today, prices are doing two things at once. They're partly reflecting changes in the value of goods and services, and they're partly reflecting changes in the value of the money itself. Everything is relative, and there is no constant. The measuring stick is stretching, so the signal is completely distorted. Is the house getting more valuable, or is the dollar becoming worth less? You actually can't even tell which one is true. And when you can't tell, economic decision-making starts to break down. Not to belabor the point, but just imagine if I use a ruler to measure your height, but every year I secretly make the ruler 7% longer. Well, technically it averages out to be 7% per year, but year by year, you don't actually know if it's 7% or 1% or 20%. So when I look at you and go, hey, you're shrinking, you're probably going to think you need to go out and buy smaller pants. But did you actually shrink? Of course not. I stretched the ruler without telling you. This is literally how price distortion affects capital allocation, housing affordability, risk perception, savings behavior, asset bubbles, boom bust cycles, on and on. It affects everything. Distorted price signals don't just confuse investors, they misdirect entire economies. Capital flows to the wrong places. Risk gets mispriced, savings get punished, and speculation gets rewarded. But here's, to me, maybe the most confusing part. We're all using the same stretching ruler, but we're walking around pretending like it's totally normal. And even though we can all tell that something feels broken, we blame the prices themselves. We don't blame the measuring unit, which we actually all know is changing. So I told you were shrinking, you went out and bought different pants, they didn't fit, and you blame the pants instead of me with the ruler. How does that make any sense to anyone? Housing is too expensive, healthcare is unaffordable, insurance costs keep going up. Back in my day, that cost a nickel. Hello! I just told you, the measuring stick is not constant. You cannot even know for sure whether the prices themselves changed or whether the ruler changed more. Isn't it Einstein himself who is attributed with saying, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result? That is literally fiat money. Print more money, increase the supply forever. Everyone just looks at each other confused when prices keep going up relative to a dollar whose value keeps going down.
I feel like I'm taking crazy pills!
We are trained, more accurately brainwashed, into treating the dollar as if it's constant when it's not. And just like if Einstein were secretly changing the speed of light, c, it quite literally distorts your reality. That's modern Keynesian economics at work. Einstein showed that massive objects bend space-time. Keynes showed that monetary policy bends economic reality. If you expand the money supply enough, you bend the economic environment itself. It warps everything from asset prices to risk-taking, to incentives, to savings behavior, to who gets rich, to which businesses survive, to what bubbles form, and what we call normal. And the reason people don't immediately see it is the same reason that you don't feel Earth spinning at 1,000 miles per hour. Is that how fast it spins? Yeah, it is. You're stuck inside the frame. So everyone just lives with all these assumptions like, oh, well, housing just goes up forever, and you need to invest or you'll fall behind, and government spending contributes to growing GDP, and we need 2% inflation or the economy will collapse, and on and on. All the while, maybe we're just watching the ruler stretch and calling it growth. So if Einstein shows us you need an invariant, you need a constant, you need something that does not change so you can measure everything else. Well, money is how we measure value. So what's the constant in money? We know that fiat cannot play that role because governments will never resist the temptation to create more money. Even Warren Buffett knows that.
The tendency of a government to want to debase its currency over time is, there's no system that beats that. There will be a push toward weaker currencies because all the motivations are to doing a lot of things that can cause trouble with money. In the end, if you've got people that control the currency, you can issue paper money and you will. The natural course of government is to make the currency worth less over time, and that's got important consequences. And it's very hard to build checks and balances into the system to keep that from happening.
Historically, gold was the closest thing we had to that constant. Harder to expand, slower to inflate, but not perfect. There's still no cap on how much of it can be mined, no guardrails on how much can be introduced year by year. As technology improves and the price of gold increases, its supply can potentially be expanded faster and faster. So I would argue the constant problem still exists, which leads me, of course, finally, to Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a monetary system where the issuance and the long-term supply is not a political decision. It's entirely rule-based. Rules, but no rulers. Completely transparent and terminally capped. You can argue about demand, you can argue about adoption, you can argue about volatility, but the one thing you can't argue is the total max supply, meaning whether or not that denominator will expand simply because someone out there wants it to. That makes Bitcoin the first serious candidate for a true monetary constant. I'm not saying it magically makes all prices stable tomorrow. I'm saying it gives the world something it's literally never had, a measuring stick for value that can't be stretched. And once you understand that Bitcoin is the only candidate for a true monetary constant, the normal way we talk about Bitcoin starts to sound completely backwards. Right now, basically everybody just asks, well, what's the price of Bitcoin? How many dollars is a Bitcoin worth? Well, that's kind of like doing physics and asking how many inches is the speed of light worth? It's backwards, because if Bitcoin is the constant, the better question becomes, how many Bitcoin is a dollar worth? Or more practically, how many sats is a house? How many sats is a car? How many sats is a month of rent? How many sats is an hour or year of my labor worth? This is why we say 1 Bitcoin equals 1 Bitcoin. And this is where the world is heading, because that's the only way to measure things in a unit that doesn't get diluted. And if you start thinking that way, you start noticing something that's very uncomfortable. A lot of the growth that we celebrate, a lot of the prices that we argue about, a lot of the wealth that we assume is real is just the ruler moving. Have you ever noticed that almost all prices go up over time in dollar terms, but almost all prices go down over time in Bitcoin terms? Well, which one is the truth? Which one is accurate? I'd argue it's simply a matter of using the right measuring stick. And yes, I know what everyone is thinking. I'm fully aware of the number one obvious rebuttal to this entire video. Bitcoin is volatile. How can it be a monetary constant if its perceived value in dollar terms keeps changing so drastically? That is a short-term artifact of measuring it using the old frame. Of course, a new measuring system looks volatile while it's being adopted. Before Einstein, Classic physics assumed velocities were additive, meaning if you threw a ball at 10 miles an hour from a train going 50 miles an hour, someone standing still would measure it at 60 miles an hour. But discovering that the speed of light didn't change depending upon the observer was shocking. It violated intuition. It broke common sense. It looked completely wrong. Einstein didn't invent the constant. He discovered it, accepted that it was real, and rebuilt the framework around it. Because the previous frame was objectively wrong, and the constant was right. The measurements had to adjust. Satoshi created the first real-world monetary constant. Bitcoin looks volatile while we're measuring it inside an unstable monetary frame. The dollar moves, liquidity moves, global risk appetite moves. So of course, the exchange rate between the two moves. But that doesn't mean the underlying monetary rule set is unstable. It means the old system is colliding with the new one, like a monetary big bang in real time, baby. A new measuring system is always going to look volatile when measured through the old one. I'm of course not saying that today Bitcoin is already a perfect unit of account. The volatility is the market discovering its role. That first big bang was probably pretty volatile. Bitcoin probably won't look stable to us until we stop measuring it in dollars. Einstein didn't change physics by inventing new particles. He changed physics by changing the frame. He showed us how measurement is relative, how perspective matters, and how without a constant, the whole system collapses. Money is the same. Prices are relationships, purchasing power is relative, and if the measuring stick changes, the entire economy gets distorted. Bitcoin changes the frame we measure value with. So maybe Einstein didn't literally discover Bitcoin, but what he discovered explains why the world eventually gravitates toward a monetary constant. And once you see that, you stop obsessing over Bitcoin's price measured in dollars. And you realize it's time to quit slacking and start stacking.